After losing his wife in a tragic accident, a billionaire father is helpless in the face of his son's prolonged silence. The moment a mute woman, also carrying the past of losing a child, enters their lives, changes everything. Clearfield was quiet beneath its winter blanket, snow layering rooftops like untouched linen. Strings of colored lights blinked lazily along Main Street, half buried under fresh powder. A soft flurry swept down the lane outside the Cole residence as the front door opened. Anna stood on the porch in a red wool coat, her scarf crooked from Liam's playful tug. The boy bounced at her side, a knit beanie slipping over his eyes as he squealed, "The ice castle, Mom! Hurry!" From the doorway, Ethan adjusted Liam's hat and kissed the top of Anna's head, lingering just a second too long. "You sure you don't want me to come with you too?" he asked. Anna turned to him, her breath fogging between them. "You've got that shareholder call, remember? We'll be back before you notice." Ethan nodded, but didn't move. "You know I'd rather be freezing next to you than listening to Dave Rothman complain about quarterly burn rates." Anna grinned and leaned in. "Then come next year. But tonight's for snow angels and Liam's terrible sled steering." Liam poked his head between them. "Dad, you promised you'd build me a snow fort when I got back." Ethan dropped to one knee. "You bring me back a cup of hot cocoa, and I'll make it big enough to fit a dragon." The boy's eyes lit up. "Deal." He watched them walk down the driveway, their silhouettes shrinking in the falling snow, until the car turned onto the main road. Inside, warmth clashed with the quiet. Ethan stepped into his office, where sleek panels and brushed steel framed the room. He sat at the desk, flicked open his laptop, and tried to ignore the subtle throb in his chest. There was no reason for it. Nothing was wrong. His assistant Marla stepped in, holding a folder. "Mr. Cole, the final revisions from Mavtech's legal team. Leave them there," Ethan said, without looking up. Marla hesitated. "You could push this call to tomorrow. I'm sure Anna and Liam, they'll be fine. Just a couple of hours," Ethan muttered. Marla stared at him. "You know. I once missed my daughter's first recital for a budget meeting. It's the only thing I still regret after 20 years. He glanced up, met her eyes. "You think I'm making a mistake?" he asked. She offered a small shrug. "No one ever thinks it's the last time." The phone rang. A landline. Strange. He reached for it. "Ethan Cole." "Mr. Cole, this is Officer Bill Sloan, Clearfield PD. Are you the husband of Anna Cole?" Ethan stood slowly. His voice dipped. "What happened?" "There's been an accident. Single vehicle. Slid off the highway, just south of Pine Hollow. Your wife and son were inside." The silence stretched. Ethan's hand clenched the phone tighter. "Is she—" There was a pause. "I'm very sorry. Your wife didn't survive the impact. Your son's being taken to St. Lucia's hospital. Stable, but unconscious." The phone dropped from Ethan's fingers. It hit the carpet with a dull thud. He ran. The hospital corridor was fluorescent and sterile, the air tainted with antiseptic and something darker. Suspense. Ethan burst through the ER double doors, chest heaving. A nurse tried to stop him, but he ignored her. "Anna Cole, my wife, my son, Liam Cole, where are they?" Dr. Kramer intercepted him, his white coat flaring as he moved fast. "Mr. Cole, I'm Dr. Kramer. Please come with me." Ethan followed blindly. "We did everything we could," the doctor said as they entered the dimmed family room. "The impact crushed the passenger side. Your wife's injuries were catastrophic. I'm sorry." Ethan sat down slowly, not because he was ready, but because his legs had stopped listening to him. "And my son?" Dr. Kramer adjusted his glasses. "Minor lacerations, a fractured wrist, but no internal damage. He's stable, physically." "Physically?" Ethan's voice cracked. "He hasn't spoken since he woke up. He's alert. He looks around. But he's silent. We're bringing in Dr. Elaine Moore. She's our child trauma specialist. Later, in the pediatric ward, Liam lay in a bed far too big for his frame. His face was turned to the wall. Tubes ran from his arm, a cast wrapped around his wrist. He didn't look when Ethan stepped in. Ethan sat beside him, gently brushing a strand of hair from the boy's forehead. "Hey, champ, I'm here." No response. "I talked to the doctors. You're going to be okay. You're strong, like your mum." Still nothing. "You remember the snow fort? I still owe you that." Liam blinked, but the silence grew heavier. Ethan's fingers curled into fists. He looked up at Dr. Moore, standing at the doorway. "He won't talk to me," he said. Dr. Moore entered, soft-spoken, but firm. "Mr. Cole, your son witnessed something no child should. Trauma like this doesn't just disappear. It burrows deep. The guilt, the fear, the confusion. I just want to fix it," Ethan murmured. Dr. Moore paused. "Then you need to understand that right now, what he needs isn't a fixer. He needs safety, quiet, someone who sees him, even if he can't speak." Ethan looked at his son again. He realized he didn't know how to reach him. He had no map for this. And the night that took his wife had stolen something far greater than he had yet to understand. The snow outside the Cole estate had lost its brilliance. It had grayed, hardened along the edges of the stone driveway, like forgotten frost clinging to memory. Icicles hung stubbornly from the porch eaves, unmelted by a sun that hadn't fully shown itself in days. Inside, the house breathed silence. Ethan stood at the base of the staircase, a tray balanced in his hands, 2 slices of toast, a small bowl of fruit, and Liam's favorite blue mug filled halfway with warm milk. He stared up toward the second floor. The landing was empty, the hallway shadowed. A faint sound floated down, a cartoon jingle, muffled and grainy. He climbed slowly, step by step, pausing outside Liam's room. The door was cracked, just enough for a sliver of light to spill into the hallway. He didn't knock. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. "It's me. I brought you breakfast." No answer. He shifted the tray, trying to balance it one-handed as he pushed the door a little wider. The room was dim. Heavy blackout curtains sealed away the afternoon sun. A television glowed quietly in the corner, casting flickers of color over Liam's still frame curled on the bed. Ethan set the tray down, just outside. "I'll just leave it here," he added. "If you need anything, just knock." He waited. Not even the creak of a floorboard responded. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled faintly of burned toast. June was wiping down the counter, her wrinkled hands moving with quiet purpose. "He's not eating again," Ethan said, standing just inside the doorway. June didn't look up. "He's eating. You just don't see it. He sneaks down sometimes. Midnight mostly." Ethan leaned against the doorframe. He shouldn't have to sneak in his own home. "He doesn't know what it is anymore," June said, rinsing out a cloth. "Neither do you." He opened his mouth to argue, then thought better of it. Across the room, the fireplace lay cold. No one lit it anymore. Later that day, Dr. Elaine Moore arrived, her boots dripping snow onto the marble as she removed her coat. "He's still silent," Ethan said, before she could ask. Elaine glanced up the stairs, her eyes sharp. "Any changes?" "He looks at me now," Ethan offered. "Sometimes." She nodded. "That's something." They sat in the den, sunlight stretching thin across the rug. Elaine folded her hands. "You've tried speech therapy, occupational therapy, exposure therapy, all the right boxes. But what have you done for him?" Ethan blinked. "I don't follow." "You've thrown tools at a wound that needs time, Ethan. He lost his mother, in a flash. And what's worse, he survived. Children don't always process survival as a blessing. Sometimes it feels like betrayal." I'm his father, Ethan said. He should feel safe with me. Elaine looked at him evenly. Do you? That question hung in the air long after she'd gone. That evening, Ethan sat in his study, laptop open, but untouched. The cursor blinked on a blank email draft. His eyes wandered to the picture frame on his desk. Anna, smiling through a cloud of snowflakes, holding Liam's mittened hand. The photo was taken a week before the accident. He got up and pulled a drawer open. After a moment of hesitation, he grabbed a pen and paper. Liam, you don't have to talk to me. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I just wanted you to know I'm still here. That I miss hearing your voice. That I miss you. I'm sorry I don't know how to help. I wish I did. Love, Dad. He folded the note, knelt outside Liam's room, and slid it under the door. The television was still on. Ethan lingered, hand pressed to the wall beside the frame. Then he turned and walked away. The next morning, the paper was still there, but someone had pushed a pencil beside it. Marla called that afternoon, her voice familiar but distant over speakerphone. How's he doing? She asked gently. Same, Ethan said, pacing the window. Maybe worse. I don't know. He doesn't let me in. Maybe you're knocking on the wrong door, Marla replied. Ethan ran a hand over his face. I used to run a company, Marla. I knew how to fix things, plan for them. But this is like watching a person fade behind glass. There was a pause. I've worked for you for 10 years, she said. You've never once quit anything. This isn't a product launch. Number. It's harder. Ethan didn't respond. That night he microwaved mac and cheese. He carried a small plate upstairs and knocked softly. I know it's been a while since we built a snow fort, he murmured, resting his back against the wall beside the door. I'm sorry for that. I wish I could take that night back. I wish I had said yes to going with you and your mum. I thought I had more time. A long pause. Then something faint, like the sound of socks against hardwood. He looked down. The plate was gone. His heart caught in his throat. He didn't say anything, but he smiled. It was the first time in a year. The sky over Clearfield hung low and pale, as if unsure whether to snow or weep. Bare branches scratched against Ethan's office windows, clicking like fingernails on glass. Inside, the quiet had grown stale, more echo than comfort. Ethan stood in the hallway, watching the small movement of a pencil roll across the floor just inside Liam's door. It had been 2 days since he left the note. No written reply had come. But something in the deliberate placement of that pencil, parallel to the paper, not random, felt intentional. It was enough to make him act. Later that afternoon, he sat stiffly in a plastic chair in the lobby of Clearfield Rehabilitation Center. The walls were painted the color of wet leaves, muted and functional. A mother walked past him, holding the hand of a boy in a wheelchair. Neither looked up. Across from him sat Harper Wynne, the center's director, a tall woman with steel-gray hair and half-moon glasses perched low on her nose. I'm not looking for a therapist, Ethan said. I've been through 7. I need someone who understands children who don't talk, who can meet him where he is. Harper opened a folder. And what makes you think he wants to be met? Ethan flinched, then exhaled. I don't know. Maybe I'm just tired of standing on the outside. Harper studied him for a long moment, then slid a second folder across the table. This is Grace Monroe. Ethan glanced down. The first photo showed a woman mid-30s, no makeup, faint crow's feet at the eyes. She was holding hands with a small girl who had Down syndrome, guiding her through an art project. The next page was a letter, handwritten in childish block letters. Miss Grace is the only one who doesn't talk, but still hears me. She doesn't speak? Ethan asked, thumbing through the credentials. No, Harper said simply. Hasn't for over 5 years. What happened? She lost her daughter in a fire. Aged 4. They found her in the laundry room clutching a blanket. Grace hasn't spoken since. Ethan closed the folder. And you're recommending her? I'm saying she listens differently than most people ever learn to. Differently, Ethan thought. That word stuck. Grace arrived at the Cole house 2 days later. June opened the door and stepped aside, quietly noting the canvas duffel slung over Grace's shoulder. The woman was dressed plainly. Loose jeans, a soft grey sweater, and a worn satchel strapped across her chest. Her eyes scanned the foyer, but didn't linger. Ethan stepped forward, hesitant. Miss Monroe? Grace nodded once. She reached into her bag, pulled out a small, spiral-bound notebook, and wrote, in neat, fluid script. Thank you for having me. I understand you have questions. I can answer everything in writing, or you can just observe for now. Ethan read the note and nodded. We'll start slow. June carried Grace's bag up to the guest room. Ethan led her to the sunroom, where the snow light filtered soft and white across hardwood floors. I have cameras in his room, he said suddenly. Grace paused. Not to intrude, Ethan added, just to make sure someone's watching, in case he hurts himself. Grace met his eyes, then wrote, He doesn't need to be watched. He needs to be seen. Ethan didn't reply. That evening, Grace unpacked silently. No music, no humming. Just the methodical thump of folded sweaters onto cedar-lined drawers. From the window of the guest room, she saw movement. A curtain shift, a silhouette in the window across the hall. A small figure, motionless. She turned slightly, just enough to let him know she saw him, and raised her hand, not to wave, but simply to acknowledge. The curtain didn't move again. The next morning, Ethan found Grace in the kitchen with June. The two women communicated quietly, Grace writing and showing, June nodding with a curious blend of respect and maternal protectiveness. She doesn't eat meat, June said later. Asked if Liam had food preferences. I told her he eats whatever doesn't look back at him. Ethan tried not to smile. Mid-morning, Grace stood at the base of the stairs, a spiral-bound sketch pad in hand. She didn't call out or knock. Instead, she sat on the bottom step and began to draw. Simple things at first. A tree, a snowman, a kite. Then, she flipped the page and drew a boy with messy hair sitting under a blanket. A few moments later, the softest sound, a door creaking open at the top of the stairs, then closing again. Ethan watched from the hallway, unseen. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. That night, Grace placed a note on the table where Liam's dinner usually sat. I'll be downstairs if you want company. No talking. Just puzzles. She left the box lid open, the first corner piece already in place. She didn't wait for an answer, and for the first time since Anna's death, neither did Ethan. Later, after the house had gone still, Grace stood at the second-floor landing. She laid her palm gently on the wall beside Liam's room. Not knocking, just letting him know someone was there. Inside the room, Liam sat cross-legged on his bed, the TV remote resting beside him. His eyes flicked toward the door. Then, slowly, he picked up a pencil and began to draw. Morning in Clearfield pressed down in a cold hush. A brittle frost webbed across the window panes of the Cole estate, its patterns like the branches of trees that had forgotten how to bloom. The sky outside was the pale blue of unspoken things. Ethan sat alone in his study, a monitor flickering gently on the desk before him. The camera feed from Liam's room was muted, colorless in its night vision mode. A boy and a woman sat on the floor, still, side by side. No words, just presence. He hadn't meant to watch it this often. A knock came at the study door. "It's just me," June said softly, holding a folded blanket. "Thought I'd bring this up. Gets cold in here when you don't move for hours." "I'm fine," Ethan murmured. She walked in anyway, setting the blanket on the armchair. Her eyes drifted to the monitor. "She's just sitting there," Ethan said. "Maybe that's enough," June replied. He didn't answer. His jaw tightened slightly. "She's not doing anything, June. He's not even looking at her." "She's not leaving either," June said, and then, with a gentle sharpness, "Neither are you." 3 weeks earlier, a technician named Coley had installed the camera under Ethan's supervision. "No audio," Ethan had said, "just visual. I'm not trying to invade, just make sure everything's okay." Coley had nodded, attaching the device above the window frame, angled subtly toward the center of Liam's room. "You want me to show you how to access the feed?" "I already know how." "You trust this woman?" Coley had asked. Ethan hesitated. "I don't know what I trust." Now, he watched Grace pick up a red block from the carpet and place it beside a yellow one. Liam's legs were drawn into his chest. His eyes tracked her movements, but subtly, as if afraid to be caught looking. On the screen, Grace smiled. Then she paused and raised her hands. Her fingers moved slowly, deliberately. 2 taps against her chin, a flat palm pushed out gently. "Thank you." Liam blinked. The toy fire truck beside him shifted, rolling an inch closer to her foot. Ethan leaned forward in his chair. "What are you doing?" he whispered under his breath. Later that evening, he called Marla. "She's signing to him," Ethan said, pacing. "I saw her do it. Just now." "And?" came her voice, tinny through the speaker. "And he pushed a toy toward her. He gave her something. He's never done that." "Sounds like progress," Marla said. Ethan paused. "I don't understand it." "Maybe you don't need to." "I don't like not knowing what's going on in my own house, Marla." There was silence for a moment. Then Marla's voice softened. "Ethan, maybe this house needs someone who doesn't talk. Maybe your son is finally hearing something he can actually understand." The next morning, Ethan confronted Grace in the hallway. She had just finished making tea, her notepad tucked under one arm. "I saw you signing yesterday," he said. "You used thank you, didn't you?" Grace looked at him, then nodded slowly. "Where did he learn that?" Ethan asked. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small laminated chart. American Sign Language Basics for Children. She flipped it to the 3rd card. "Thank you." Below it was a childlike scrawl in pencil. "Liam's." Ethan studied it for a moment, then handed the card back. "You didn't ask me," he said, quieter now. Grace tilted her head, then wrote, "He asked me." Ethan exhaled. That night, he couldn't sleep. The house was still. The screen glowed again in the corner of his study. Liam and Grace sat at opposite ends of the rug. A puzzle lay between them, half finished, pieces scattered like a tiny map with no legend. Grace pointed to a corner piece. Liam reached over and slowly pressed it into place. Ethan blinked, then scrubbed a hand over his mouth. He reached toward the monitor, hovered over the power button. He didn't press it. Instead, he whispered to the empty room, "He didn't do that with me." The next afternoon, June brought him a fresh cup of coffee. He didn't look away from the monitor. "You've worked here long enough," he said. "Tell me honestly, do you think she's the right person for this?" June sat down across from him, folding her hands in her lap. "She doesn't treat him like a project," she said, "or a problem to solve. She just sees him, and he's starting to see her back." Ethan looked at the screen again. Grace had drawn a smiley face on a chalkboard. Liam stared at it, then picked up the eraser and wiped it clean. A beat passed. Then he drew his own face. No smile. Grace nodded. She let him change the story, June said quietly. Ethan turned the monitor off, and he didn't turn it back on. That evening, after the house had gone quiet, Ethan stood outside Liam's room. Through the half-open door, he saw the boy curled under a blanket on the bed, his back to the door. Grace sat nearby, cross-legged on the floor, a book open in her lap. She wasn't reading, just sitting, just being. Ethan didn't enter. He stepped back into the hall, leaned against the wall, and let the silence wrap around him. It didn't feel like absence. It felt like trust. The air in Clearfield had warmed, just slightly. Snow still clung to shaded corners, but the icicles had begun to drip. Slow, deliberate reminders that even winter softens. Birds had returned to the trees, not yet singing, but watching. Grace sat on the floor in Liam's room, her sketchpad balanced on one knee. She drew with quiet purpose, her pencil making soft, confident lines across the page. A circle, 2 dots, a smile. She held it up. Liam, seated across from her at a cautious distance, didn't move. So she drew again. This time, her name, Grace. Block letters, all caps. She pointed to herself, then the word. Still nothing. She smiled softly, flipped to a fresh page, and slid it halfway across the floor like a peace offering. Then, she waited. Minutes passed. Liam's fingers twitched against the carpet. His eyes flicked to the page, then to her, then away. And then, slowly, he crawled forward. He picked up the pencil she'd left beside it, gripped it in a tight fist, and began to write. G-R-A-S. It was messy, the S nearly backward. Grace didn't correct him. She simply tapped her chest, nodded, and signed, "Thank you." Liam's eyes lingered on her hands. Later that afternoon, June found Ethan in the kitchen, staring out the window, coffee forgotten in his hand. She wrote her name, Ethan said without turning, and he copied it. June paused at the sink. He did? Misspelled it, but he tried. That's not nothing. It's more than I've seen him do in a year. June dried her hands. It's because she doesn't push. She doesn't even speak. Maybe that's why, June said gently. The next morning, Grace brought a small folding easel into Liam's room and propped up a foam board layered with Velcro letters. She gestured to it, then handed Liam a card. "Ask me anything." At first, he didn't move, just watched. Grace waited. After a while, he walked over, pulled off the letters M-O-M, and held them in his palm. Grace didn't speak. She didn't flinch. She only knelt and pulled out her notebook. On the blank page, she drew a woman with long hair, wearing a red coat. Then, slowly, she touched her hand to her chest. "Mi con luono jai." The sign was subtle, a hand across the heart, then out toward the room. Liam stared. Then he picked up the pencil again. This time, he drew. Ethan passed by the open door and stopped in his tracks. Liam was hunched over a sheet of paper, tongue caught between his teeth in concentration. Grace sat beside him, not guiding, just present. He was drawing a woman. The coat was unmistakably red. Ethan's throat tightened. That night, Ethan called Dr. Elaine Moore. He asked about Anna, Ethan said quietly. Elaine's voice softened. "That's good, Ethan. It doesn't feel good. It feels like he's remembering everything I can't fix." It's not about fixing. It's about allowing space. Grace is giving him that. She barely does anything. "She's doing everything," Elaine said, "but without noise." The next day, Grace introduced the sign for safe. She signed it first, then pointed to Liam. Then she brought her hands to her chest and repeated the sign, this time slower. Safe. Liam hesitated, then mirrored her movement, The shape was clumsy, but intentional. They tried okay next. Then not your fault. He hesitated longer with that one. Grace didn't rush him. Later, Liam traced the signs again on his own, in the air, before bed. At dinner, June told Ethan, "He came down the stairs this morning." Ethan froze, fork halfway to his mouth. "He did?" Sat at the bottom. Didn't say anything, didn't eat. Just watched Grace water the plants. Ethan nodded slowly. "He used to do that when Anna sang." June smiled. "Maybe he's listening again." One morning, Grace left a puzzle on the table with a sticky note. "Wanna play later? No talking needed." By the time she came back, 4 edge pieces had been fit together, and underneath the note, a second one written in shaky handwriting, YS. She didn't fix the spelling. She simply added more pieces and waited. The bond grew in gestures, in looks, in the way Liam no longer flinched when Grace sat beside him, how his eyes found her before the TV remote, how his pencil moved more than his silence ever had. He hadn't spoken, but he was finally, unmistakably, speaking. One evening, Grace came down the stairs, notebook in hand, and sat across from Ethan in the den. She slid the open page toward him. He asked about his mom today. Drew her, shared her. Ethan read it, nodding. "I saw." Grace flipped the page. "He's carrying more than sadness. There's guilt, deep, quiet." Ethan exhaled through his nose, long and slow. "I know. I think I've been too afraid to ask." Grace didn't write anything else. She just looked at him, eyes steady, kind, and maybe a little broken in the same places. He met her gaze, held it for longer than he meant to. "I don't know how to help him," he said finally. She raised her hand, tapped her temple, then pointed to his chest. Then she held her palm out, flat and still. The sign for listening. Ethan didn't speak again, but he stayed in the chair long after Grace went upstairs, and the next morning, when Liam came down to find Grace setting the table for breakfast, Ethan was there too, already seated, hands folded, waiting, not talking, just listening. The afternoon light in Clearfield filtered soft and golden through Liam's bedroom window. Dust hung suspended in the air like it was waiting for permission to fall. The world, for a rare moment, felt unhurried. Grace sat cross-legged on the rug beside Liam, who was quietly lining up his toy animals in meticulous rows. Between them sat the old plush dog, worn at the ears, stuffing peeking from the seam where one paw had been sewn back on. She tapped the toy gently, then tilted her head, mimicking its floppy, lopsided posture. One eyebrow up, mouth open, tongue out. Liam glanced at her, then back to the toy. Grace leaned in again, exaggerated the pose even more. Eyes crossed this time. A sound broke the stillness. It was small at first. A hiccup, maybe. Then again, louder. A laugh. Short. Disbelieving. Real. Liam brought a hand to his mouth like he hadn't meant for it to happen, like the sound had escaped on its own. Grace didn't react too strongly, just smiled and placed a hand lightly over her heart. Then, without a word, she picked up the toy dog, made it wobble toward Liam in a ridiculous little trot, then let it tumble flat on its face with a soft plop. Liam laughed again, this time harder. The camera in the corner caught all of it. Ethan stood in his office, watching the playback on a loop. He didn't realize how tightly he was holding the glass until his fingers started to ache. The amber liquid inside trembled with the shake of his grip. He rewound to the moment the laughter began, again and again. There was no sound, just a boy's face lighting from within, a mouth open wide with something between joy and surprise, and a woman sitting across from him, meeting the moment not with celebration, but quiet recognition. Ethan set the glass down. Hard. Later that evening, he knocked lightly on June's door. She was organizing laundry, folding in neat stacks. He laughed, Ethan said simply. She looked up, a towel in her hands. He did. He nodded once. Was it her? She asked. He hesitated. It wasn't me. June walked over and placed a hand gently on his forearm. She opened the door. That doesn't mean you're not still welcome inside. Ethan sat on the edge of a chair, staring at the floor. I watched it 10 times, he admitted, and I kept thinking, why wasn't I there? Why couldn't I make that happen? June knelt to his level, her voice firm but kind. Because you were grieving too. You still are. But you're here now. Grace found a folded sticky note on the kitchen counter the next morning. It was written in Ethan's handwriting, neat, structured. He hasn't laughed like that in years. Thank you. She didn't write back, but she smiled. Later that day, Ethan joined them in the living room. Liam was seated on the rug again, the plush dog in his lap. Grace looked up briefly, her expression unreadable. Ethan didn't speak. He just sank slowly to the floor, not too close, but not too far either. Grace raised a brow, then signed to Liam, tapping her chin, palm out. Thank you, the way they always did. Liam glanced at Ethan, then mimicked the sign, his eyes flickering between the two adults. There was no fear in his gaze, just wonder. Ethan cleared his throat gently. Hey, buddy, he said, voice careful. That dog's still your favorite, huh? Liam didn't speak, but he nodded. Grace passed him a card with a hand-drawn version of the same dog on it. Below it, she had written, Silly dog. Liam giggled softly. Ethan's chest tightened. That evening, Ethan sat again in his study, the screen dark. He didn't need to watch the footage again. Instead, he scrolled through old videos on his phone. Clips of Anna laughing at the kitchen table, Liam wearing a blanket cape. A different life. A warmer one. Then he paused on a photo. The three of them at the fair, Liam covered in ice cream, Anna mid-laugh. He stared at it for a long time. Then, quietly, he whispered, He laughed today. And though no one answered, the room didn't feel quite so silent anymore. Upstairs, Liam handed Grace a new drawing, himself, stick-limbed, standing beside the plush dog, both with giant smiles. Another figure stood nearby, not Grace, not Ethan. He pointed to it. Grace looked closely. A woman in a red coat. She brought her hand to her chest again, then out. She's here. Liam nodded. Then, very slowly, he reached for her hand. Grace didn't move, but she didn't pull away, and Liam didn't let go. A grey fog had settled over Clearfield, low and unmoving, like the town itself had decided to stay quiet a little longer. The trees, stripped bare now, stood still in the yard behind the coal house, skeletal against the morning light. Inside, the quiet didn't feel empty. It felt observant. Ethan sat at the dining room table, nursing a second cup of black coffee, half drunk and long since cold. Across from him, Grace was helping Liam line up flashcards, each one bearing a letter or a symbol. Her movements were steady, patient, never rushed. As she reached to reposition a card Liam had pushed sideways, her sleeve slipped back slightly. That's when Ethan saw it, a slim silver bracelet around her wrist, dulled with wear. Just visible, etched on the underside, a name, Eden. He looked away instinctively, then glanced back. Grace had already pulled her sleeve down again, but the image stuck in his mind like a whisper that didn't want to be ignored. That afternoon, Ethan found June in the pantry, refolding dish towels. She wears a bracelet, he said, without preamble. June raised a brow, lips curving slightly. Most women do. No, This one's different, it's old, and it has a name on it. June paused. Eden. Ethan looked up, surprised. You know? I've seen it once or twice. She never talks about it, but... She folded the last towel, slower now. It's the kind of name someone carves into silver when they need to keep something close, even after it's gone. Ethan frowned. Gone? June just looked at him. He didn't ask Grace directly. Instead, that evening, he picked up the phone and called Harper Wynne, the director at Clearfield Rehabilitation. Sorry to call out of the blue, Ethan said, clearing his throat. It's about Grace Monroe. There was a pause. Then Harper said, What do you want to know? She wears a bracelet. It says, Eden. Harper didn't answer right away. Her daughter, she said finally. Eden was 4 when their apartment caught fire. The smoke alarms didn't go off in time. Ethan closed his eyes. She never spoke again after that. Not a single word. The next day, Ethan passed Grace in the hallway. She was carrying Liam's art supplies in a small tote bag, barefoot on the hardwood floor. Her bracelet caught the light again as she adjusted the strap on her shoulder. He stopped her gently with a gesture. She turned, waiting. I saw your bracelet, he said. Eden? Grace didn't move, but her eyes shifted, softened. Ethan swallowed. You don't have to say anything, I just... He paused. I'm sorry. Grace nodded once, slow, then reached into her bag and pulled out her notebook. She wrote only one line. She liked rain, said it sounded like stories falling from the sky. Ethan read it, then looked at her. She sounds like she was magic. Grace tapped the paper once, then tucked the notebook away. She didn't smile. But she didn't walk away either. Later that evening, Liam and Grace sat on the living room rug, coloring side by side. Ethan lingered nearby, pretending to read the newspaper. Liam held up a drawing. 3 stick figures beneath a cloud, smiling up at raindrops. The smallest figure held a yellow umbrella. Ethan looked at Grace. She blinked quickly and reached for her pen. For Eden, she wrote in the corner of the paper, small but deliberate. Liam watched her, then reached over and drew a 4th figure, tiny, hovering in the sky above the rain. Grace didn't move for a long time. That night, Ethan found himself standing by the bookshelf in his study. He ran his fingers over the spines until he found what he was looking for. A slim collection of children's poems Anna used to read aloud. The pages had softened from years of bedtime repetition. He flipped through slowly until he found the poem she always said reminded her of Liam. Wherever the rain goes, little feet follow chasing puddles and whispers and dreams they haven't grown into yet. Ethan closed the book and set it on the kitchen counter the next morning before Grace came down. When she found it, there was a note tucked inside, one simple line. Page 27, for Eden. Wherever the rain becomes light. She read it once, then again, and for a moment she stood completely still. That afternoon, while organizing Liam's flashcards, Grace placed one quietly aside. It had a single word. Fracture. Liam noticed. He picked it up, turned it over. On the back, Grace had drawn a crack, like lightning across glass. But next to it, she'd drawn a gold line tracing over the break, mending it. Liam looked at her, confused. She tapped the crack, then the gold, then her chest, then his. Liam didn't fully understand, but he smiled. Ethan saw her differently after that, not as the woman who had stepped in when he couldn't reach his son, not as the silent caregiver, the calm in the storm, but as someone who, despite everything, still chose to show up every day with a quiet kind of bravery, one forged not in words, but in loss, in memory, and in choosing to stay open even when the world had tried to shut her down. And for the first time, he realized he wasn't just grateful. He was watching her. Really watching her. The light had softened by late afternoon, stretching long across the wooden floor of the house. Outside, the wind rattled bare branches, whispering against the windows like it wanted to. Inside, the air was dense with something unspoken, hovering just beneath the surface. Grace had turned the small reading nook beside the fireplace into a gentle corner of practice. 2 cushions, a stack of therapy cards, a mirror, and a toy microphone Liam had once refused to touch. Now, he sat across from her, hands folded, watching. She tapped her throat and signed, "Feel." Liam hesitated. Grace placed 2 fingers gently against her own neck, closed her eyes, and hummed softly. Nothing audible, just vibration. Then she pointed to him. He brought tentative fingers to his throat, mimicking her. She mouthed a single sound. Her lips didn't force it, just shaped it, slow and calm. Liam followed, breath catching, lips tight. Then he opened his mouth. Nothing came. Again, a whisper. Then, It was barely there, but it was his. Grace didn't flinch. She smiled softly and mouthed another word, "Mum." Liam watched her mouth form the shape again and again, until he tried. His voice cracked, like paper tearing, but the word formed. "Mum." He froze. His hands flew to his mouth, like he'd said something forbidden. His eyes filled with fear. Grace didn't speak. She reached for him, not forcefully, but openly, and wrapped her arms around his small, trembling frame. He let her. And then, he cried. Silently at first, then harder, his chest rising and falling against hers, like he didn't know how to contain the release. Grace held him there, her own tears quiet, her breath steady. Neither moved. That evening, Grace left a note on the kitchen counter before retreating upstairs with Liam. He said a word, "today." Not for me. For her. It hurt. But he didn't run. Ethan found it hours later, when the house had gone still again. He stared at the handwriting until the letters blurred. Then, out of habit more than choice, he sat at his desk and tapped the camera feed open. Liam's room glowed dimly in the grainy black and white of night vision. The boy sat on the edge of his bed, knees to his chest. The plush dog rested beside him. He wasn't playing, just looking out the window. Ethan adjusted the audio, leaning in. At first, there was only static, then a voice. Soft, thin, broken. "I didn't mean for her to go. I should have been with her." A pause. "If Dad knew I lived and Mum didn't, he'd hate me." The words hit like a punch to the chest. Ethan's hand knocked his glass off the desk. It shattered against the hardwood, shards and whiskey spreading like veins through silence. He staggered backward and collapsed into the chair behind him, hands shaking, chest heaving. The room didn't feel real. He heard the words again, echoed in memory, not through the speakers this time. He'd hate me. He buried his face in his hands. June found him there minutes later, drawn by the sound of glass breaking. "Ethan?" she called from the doorway. He didn't move. She stepped in, careful not to tread on the shards. When she touched his shoulder, he looked up. "He thinks I hate him," Ethan whispered. June's face softened. "You don't." "I never told him I didn't." She crouched beside him, no judgment in her voice. "You didn't know." "I should have," he snapped. "I should have seen it. All this time, he's been blaming himself. He thought I blamed him, too." June's voice was steady. "He's been waiting for permission to come back to you, but he needed to know you'd open the door." Ethan didn't reply. She stood, offering her hand. "Go to him," she said. It took him 10 minutes to find the courage. The hallway was dark. Liam's door was cracked open just slightly. Ethan knocked, 2 soft taps. Nothing. He pushed gently. Liam sat up, startled. "Hey, buddy," Ethan said, voice dry, thick. "It's Dad." The boy didn't answer. His arms wrapped tighter around his knees. Ethan stepped inside and knelt. "I heard what you said," he whispered. Liam's face dropped. He looked away, shoulders tensing. "I need you to know something." Ethan's voice wavered, but he pushed through. "You didn't do anything wrong. Not then. Not now." Liam's chin quivered. "I miss her too," Ethan said. "Every day. But if she were here, she'd be so proud of you." The boy's mouth parted, but no sound came. "And I'm proud of you," Ethan added. Liam blinked up at him. "I love you, Liam." A pause, then, "I'm sorry," Liam whispered. Ethan reached out, slowly, openly. Liam crawled into his arms, and Ethan held him, tighter than he had in a year. Neither of them spoke for a long time. They didn't need to. Because finally, the silence wasn't between them. It was around them, and it was whole. Rain tapped gently on the windows, soft and measured like a lullaby played too slowly. The fireplace in the study glowed low, its embers pulsing beneath the grate, casting faint shadows across the walls. Everything in the house seemed to breathe slower that morning, like it was waiting. Ethan sat at his desk with a blank sheet of paper before him and an envelope already addressed in the top drawer. The same one he had written months ago and never mailed, never folded, never dared to hand to the boy, whose silence had mirrored his own. Now, he pulled it out again. The handwriting was tight, hesitant. "You don't have to talk to me, not yet. Maybe not ever. I just wanted you to know I'm still here, that I miss you." His hands hovered over it, then added, for the first time, "I thought you were gone too. But you weren't. You were just waiting, like me." He stared at the page, fingers curled slightly, and breathed through the ache rising in his throat. Then, carefully, he picked up the pen again and continued. "I didn't know how to help you. I thought if I was strong enough, if I stayed quiet enough, it would keep you safe. But silence doesn't keep anyone safe. It just keeps them apart." He paused, then wrote, "Slower, now. I never hated you. I hated what happened. I hated myself for not being with you both that night. But not you, Liam. Not for a single second." He stopped there. No flourish, no closure, just the truth. Downstairs, Grace stood in the kitchen, preparing tea. She saw Ethan walk past the doorway, holding the folded paper in his hand, a look on his face she hadn't seen before. Not fear, not control. Something softer, something open. She didn't stop him, but she watched him go. Outside Liam's door, Ethan hesitated, just like he always had. He stared at the paper in his hands, and for a brief moment considered sliding it under the door like before. But he didn't. Instead, he knocked. "Hey," he said gently. "Can I come in?" A beat, then a soft voice. "Okay." Ethan pushed the door open. Liam sat cross-legged on the bed, his hands in his lap, clutching the stuffed dog by the ear. Ethan stepped in and didn't speak right away. He looked at his son, really looked. Liam looked back. Ethan walked over, knelt slowly, and held out the letter. "I wrote this a long time ago," he said. "I never gave it to you." Liam didn't take it. Instead, he asked, voice barely audible, "Why now?" Ethan exhaled. "Because I finally want to say it out loud." He opened the letter and read it. Not like a performance, not to impress, but like someone letting go of something too heavy to carry alone. Every word hung in the space between them. When he reached the end, he lowered the page to his lap and waited. Liam's voice came so soft, it nearly disappeared. "I thought you didn't want me anymore." Ethan's eyes stung. Number never that. "I heard you crying after the accident. I thought, if I'd stayed home, maybe she wouldn't have..." Ethan crawled closer. "Liam," he whispered, his voice breaking, "you were 6. That was not your job to carry." "I didn't know," Liam said, tears slipping silently. "You stopped looking at me." Ethan reached for him, hands shaking. "Because I didn't know how. Every time I saw you, I saw what I lost. But it wasn't your fault. It was mine, for turning away when you needed me to look." Liam leaned forward suddenly, pressing his face into Ethan's chest. Ethan wrapped both arms around him, burying his face into the boy's hair. He smelled like soap and crayons, and something Ethan hadn't noticed in too long: warmth. "I'm scared," Liam said into his shirt. "Me too," Ethan replied, "but we don't have to be scared alone." They stayed that way for minutes, unmoving, breathing in time. When Liam finally pulled back, his eyes were red, but calmer. He reached over to Ethan's letter and pulled it closer, flipping it gently. Then he reached for a pencil, pausing. He looked up. "Can I write something on it?" Ethan nodded. Liam wrote, in shaky, uneven letters, at the bottom of the page, "Can we start over?" Ethan smiled, his chest tight. He reached for the pencil and wrote below it, "We already have." Later that night, Grace found the letter folded on the kitchen table, left open by the lamp. She didn't read all of it, just the final 2 lines. She traced her finger beneath Liam's question. Then Ethan's reply, and smiled. Not because things were fixed, but because they were beginning. The snow had melted into the soil outside, leaving the ground damp and dark, a quiet echo of winter's passing. The sky over Clearfield had softened, turning a shade of pale lavender just after sunset. Light from the dining room windows spilled across the porch, golden and warm, like something had finally come home. Ethan stood at the stove, sleeves rolled up, brow furrowed in concentration. The garlic hadn't burned yet, which June took as a small miracle. "You sure you don't want me finishing that?" she asked, arms folded, watching him stir the sauce like it was a business negotiation. "I've managed billion-dollar deals," Ethan said. "How hard can pasta be?" June raised an eyebrow. "Try feeding grief through a strainer sometime, then get back to me." Ethan smiled. "Fair." He glanced over at the table, now set for 3. Candles, plates that matched, water glasses already sweating. For once, the room didn't feel like a shrine. It felt lived in. Grace stood in the doorway, hesitant, as Liam bounded ahead of her. "Dinner," he announced, not quite shouting, but louder than usual. "I helped with the napkins." Ethan turned, wiping his hands. "You folded them like dragons. I saw that." Liam beamed and rushed to his seat, nudging the chair closest to Grace. "Sit here," he said. "Please." Grace sat slowly, still unsure. Ethan walked around the table, setting down the bowl of pasta with a small flourish. "No stars or fish-shaped noodles," he said, "but I promise it's edible." Liam grinned. "Mum called them fish, but I knew." Ethan's smile faltered only for a second before he caught it. "I think she'd like tonight," Liam added. Grace's eyes flicked to him, then to Ethan, and then she nodded. Dinner was simple, the kind of simple that only mattered because of who was at the table. Liam told a story about school, not real school, but a dream where his backpack turned into a boat and Grace had to rescue him with a sandwich. He stuttered once, paused, then kept going. No one corrected him. No one rushed him. Ethan listened, really listened, like it was the most important story he'd ever heard. And maybe it was. After the plates were cleared and Liam excused himself with a sleepy, "I'll finish my picture," Ethan motioned for Grace to stay a moment longer. She hesitated, then nodded. He walked to the sideboard and pulled out a bottle of wine and 2 glasses, poured only one. "I owe you something," he said, sitting down. Grace tilted her head. He didn't start with a toast. He didn't raise the glass. He looked at her, "I was wrong about you," Ethan said. "From the beginning. I watched you through a lens instead of facing you directly. I thought your silence meant distance. I didn't understand that it was the opposite." Grace pulled her notepad from her bag, but didn't write yet. "I thought because you didn't speak, you couldn't lead, that you couldn't reach him. But you did, more than I ever could." She finally scribbled a line. "You never gave up. That's why I could." Ethan looked at it, then laughed once, gently. "I gave up 100 times, I just didn't leave." Grace tapped the paper, then added below, "That's what staying looks like. Even broken." He met her eyes then, really met them. And for the first time, it didn't feel like there was anything left to prove. "I'm not asking for anything," he said slowly. "Not answers, not explanations, just something new." She looked at him carefully. Then he said it. "I'd like you to stay, not as a caregiver, not even as just Liam's teacher." He leaned forward, voice low. "But as family, if you'd want that." Grace sat still, her hands in her lap. Then she pulled the small silver bracelet from her wrist. She placed it on the table, just between them. Ethan frowned, unsure. She flipped it over, revealing the name Eden. Then she wrote, "She was my family. But you and Liam, you're the light again." Ethan's breath caught. He reached out and gently slid the bracelet back toward her. "She'd be proud of you." Grace gave a small nod. Then from the hallway, Liam called out, "Dad? Grace?" They turned. "I made something." Liam entered holding a small box, the kind Ethan had once used to keep cufflinks. Inside was a drawing, a circle of 3 people holding hands, one tall, one medium, one small. There was a red coat drawn over the shoulder of one figure, and a small dog at their feet. Ethan crouched beside him. "Who's this?" he asked. Liam pointed. "That's you. That's Grace. That's me." Grace knelt beside them, eyes wide. "And here," Liam said, pointing to the bracelet now in Grace's hand, "goes in the box, so she stays with us too." He looked up at Grace. "You can stay, right?" She didn't answer with words. She just wrapped her arms around him and Ethan. No one pulled away. The morning air in Clearfield was laced with the smell of wet earth and blooming things. Spring had arrived, not loudly, but in the slow hush of warm winds and sidewalk chalk. In the park, children's laughter floated above the budding trees like kites that didn't want to come down. Ethan held Liam's hand as they stepped off the gravel path and onto the grass. The boy tugged gently forward, his other hand reaching without hesitation for Grace's. She took it with a quiet smile. The 3 of them walked in a line that wasn't perfectly straight. Grace always a half step behind, Ethan occasionally glancing sideways to check on both. Liam, though, walked like he'd always known they'd be beside him. No doubts, no gaps, just belonging. The park was busy in the pleasant way of small towns on quiet days. A group of teenagers tossed a frisbee. A woman jogged past pushing a stroller. Someone tuned a guitar near the picnic benches. It was nothing extraordinary. But to Ethan, the sound of Liam laughing as he chased a bubble through the air might as well have been fireworks. "You're fast," he called out. Liam grinned over his shoulder. "You're old," Ethan mock gasped. "I should ground you for that." "You can't," Liam said, spinning on the grass. "Grace says today's a no-rules day." Grace, from the bench where she sat sketching the trees, gave a small, innocent shrug when Ethan turned. He shook his head, chuckling. "I've been outvoted." Later, while Liam chased a dog he'd befriended named Murphy, Ethan sat beside Grace on the bench. The sketch pad rested on her lap, a half-finished drawing of Liam flying a kite, though there was no kite in real life. Just imagination. "I didn't know you could draw like that," Ethan said. Grace lifted the page slightly, then wrote beside it, I used to draw Eden like this. When she was gone, I stopped. Ethan glanced down. The trees in the drawing were fuller than the ones in front of them. The sky, brighter. A child's world, not yet touched by shadow. Grace added another line beneath the image. Today, I wanted to remember forward instead of backward. He looked at her. This woman who had arrived quietly and dismantled every wall with a presence gentler than any voice could offer. "You're not just staying for Liam, are you?" he asked. Grace shook her head once. Ethan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box. Wooden, familiar. He opened it gently. Inside sat the silver bracelet, still engraved with Eden, but now resting atop a folded note in Liam's handwriting. "You belong with us." Grace didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her hand reached forward, and instead of putting the bracelet back on her wrist, she lifted it, kissed the edge softly, and closed the box. The past, now placed beside them, but no longer between them. Walking back to the car, Liam held both their hands. As they passed a cluster of tulips blooming beside a park bench, he glanced up at Grace. His voice came soft, without hesitation. "You feel like Mum sometimes." Ethan paused. Grace looked down at him, startled. "I mean, you're not her," Liam said quickly, "but when I hold your hand, or when you hug me, it feels the same. Safe." Grace crouched to his level, her eyes shimmering but steady. She placed one hand on her heart, then on his, and signed slowly. "She's proud of you." Then, instead of signing back, Liam whispered, "So am I." Ethan turned away for a second, blinking against a tear that came too fast. "Come on," he said after a beat. "I think we need ice cream. 3 scoops." Each, Liam gasped. "For real?" "No rules today, remember." Grace raised an eyebrow. Ethan laughed. "Okay, some rules. But that one's staying." That evening, after dinner and sticky hands and half-washed spoons, Ethan sat on the front porch steps, nursing a cup of coffee gone cold. Grace sat beside him, the bracelet box on her lap, unopened now but clean, polished. Her fingers tapped gently against the wood. Inside, through the screen door, Liam hummed to himself while coloring. He'd made up a new song, something about space dragons and peanut butter, and was determined to finish his comic by bedtime. "You ever think it'd be like this?" Ethan asked quietly. Grace wrote slowly, "Number." "But I hoped." He nodded. "Me too." The sun was dipping behind the hills, casting long golden streaks across the lawn. Fireflies blinked in and out, like they were testing their glow. Grace leaned her shoulder lightly against his. He didn't move away. From inside, Liam called out, "Can we sit outside for the sunset?" "In a minute," Ethan called back. A pause. Then, "I'm bringing the blanket." They both turned as the screen door squeaked open, and Liam emerged, dragging a blue knitted blanket, Anna's, across the floor behind him. He wrapped it around his shoulders like a cape and plopped between them on the steps. "Warm enough?" Ethan asked. Liam nodded, then looked up at Grace. "You get cold easily." Without waiting, he unfolded the blanket wider, draping half across her lap. Grace stilled. Then, gently, she covered Liam's hand with her own. None of them said anything for a long time, because they didn't have to. The sun kept sinking, and the light grew softer, and the porch held their shadows as one. 3 figures, one family, a different kind of family, but no less real,